Hi, my name's Claire, and the day I walked into court for my divorce, my mother was already seated on my husband's side, my sister too. They smiled, they lied, they called me unstable, ungrateful, said I didn't deserve the life I had. What they didn't say was that my sister was sleeping with my husband, or that they were all planning to take my $77 million inheritance together. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just sat there, shaking, until my father stood up and played a video that none of them knew existed. And in that instant, everything changed. The courtroom went dead silent. So now I'll ask you, have you ever realized your whole family was rooting for your downfall while you were still trying to love them? Because if you have, you'll want to hear what happened next. Shh. The heat had already started to settle over Houston like a wet blanket by the time I pulled into the courthouse parking lot. It was only 8:30 in the morning, but the sky was blindingly white, and even with the AC running, my palms were sweating against the steering wheel. I sat there, unmoving, staring straight ahead like the building might disappear if I wished hard enough. I should have felt relieved that this part was almost over. Divorce court. 3 syllables that had been hanging over my life like a dark cloud for months. But that wasn't the weight on my chest this morning. The fear wasn't about separating from Michael. It was about who I'd be facing inside that building. I took a shaky breath, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked older than 38, tired in a way no concealer could hide. My hair was neatly tied back, but strands were already starting to stick to my temples from the humidity. I closed my eyes for a second, and like it always did in moments like this, my mind went back. I must have been about 9 the day I drew that picture. It was just crayons on construction paper, a lopsided house with a stick figure me waving at a tall woman I labeled Mom. I tied it with a light blue ribbon I found in Grandma's sewing kit. I remember how proud I was, how carefully I held it with both hands and walked down the hallway to give it to her. She barely glanced at it. "That's nice, Marceline," she said, distracted, before setting it down on a pile of unopened mail. She never looked at it again. I kept that ribbon, still have it, tucked in a small wooden box in the back of my closet. Funny how something so small can carry so much weight, like proof that I tried to be seen, even then. I opened my eyes again. The courthouse stood in front of me like a test I hadn't studied for. The silence in the car buzzed louder than any radio. I knew it wasn't just about the marriage unraveling. The cracks had started way before I ever met Michael. They were carved in family dinners where I was talked over, birthdays where I was remembered last. My role had always been the youngest, the peacemaker, the one who kept quiet. I was supposed to stay quiet. But things changed the day I inherited $77 million. It was land in Louisiana, passed down from my grandparents. Oil companies had been sniffing around for years, and after the final sale, the check came with too many zeros for me to process. I didn't spend a cent for months. I didn't even tell anyone at first. But money has a way of leaking into conversation, and once my family knew, well, everything shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just Marceline, I was a bank account. I remember Mom sitting across from me at brunch one day, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "You know," she said, swirling her coffee, "that land was in our family for generations. I hope you understand, it's not just yours. It's ours, really. Ours. Like my name on the legal deed didn't matter. Like her absence from Grandma's hospital room at the end didn't matter. Suddenly, I was expected to share, to support, to honor the family legacy. I didn't argue. I smiled, nodded, changed the subject. But something inside me pulled tight. A knot I didn't have words for back then. And Michael? At first, he acted like he didn't care. "That's your business," he said, when I showed him the letter from the lawyer. But slowly, subtly, he changed. He started talking more about investments, about financial planning. He'd bring home articles about wealth management and lay them on the kitchen counter. "It's just a lot for one person to handle," he said once, setting a hand on my shoulder. "I could help if you want, just to take the stress off." I remember smiling and nodding again, but my skin had crawled under his touch. It wasn't just the money. It was how he looked at my mother when she praised him, how he offered to drive my sister to her dental appointments, how he played mediator every time there was tension, making himself look like the good guy, the steady one. And I let him play the hero while I shrank into silence. Then came the barbecue. A Saturday afternoon in June, hot dogs sizzling, kids chasing bubbles in the yard. I was standing by the cooler when my sister, Clarice, walked up beside me with a glass of wine already half empty. "You know," she said, without looking at me, "some of us actually work for what we have." I blinked, not sure I'd heard her right. "If you hadn't lucked out being the last grandchild," she added with a shrug, "you'd be just another struggling divorcee with a mediocre husband." Michael, standing nearby, laughed, like it was just a joke. My mother said nothing, just kept talking to her friend, like the words hadn't sliced through me. I actually smiled, said something like, "Well, I guess we all have our blessings," and walked away before my throat closed up. That night, I sat on the floor of our guest bedroom, staring at the blue ribbon in my hand, the same one I'd kept since I was a child, and I asked myself, for the first time, really, what exactly I was holding on to. What version of family was I still hoping would love me back? The car's AC hissed softly. I blinked back to the present. Today wasn't just about lawyers and signatures. It was about standing across from 3 people who had carved pieces out of me, slowly, deliberately, while smiling. My mother, my sister, my soon-to-be ex-husband. They were waiting for me, and I wasn't ready. But I opened the car door anyway, heels clicking against the pavement, purse clutched too tightly in my hand. With each step toward the courthouse, my heart thudded like it was trying to warn me. This wasn't the beginning, it was the reckoning. The air inside the courthouse was cooler than I expected, a sharp contrast to the heat pressing down outside. For a moment, I stood frozen by the door, eyes adjusting to the fluorescent light, nerves buzzing like static under my skin. And then I saw him, my father. He stood alone in the hallway, hands folded in front of him, dressed in a plain navy suit I hadn't seen him wear in years. There was something about the way he looked at me that caught me off guard. Not pity, not concern, just presence. He looked older, more than he had at Thanksgiving, which, thinking back, was the last time we'd spoken more than a few words. His beard had more gray in it, and the lines around his mouth had deepened. But his eyes, those quiet, unreadable eyes, still had the same weight I remembered from when I was little. Like he always saw more than he said. He didn't say much now, either. Just stepped forward and rested his hand on my shoulder. "I'm here because you shouldn't walk into this alone," he said. The words landed softly, but I felt them all the way down to my ribs. He hadn't taken sides. He hadn't sent messages or warnings or advice. But here he was. That simple act, showing up, meant more than I could say. We walked together toward the courtroom. Each step felt like it echoed louder than it should. The walls were lined with beige, the kind of color meant to calm people down, but only reminded me how tense everything was. My heels tapped a steady rhythm as if they were trying to keep my legs from shaking. As we neared the courtroom doors, I felt my stomach tighten. I'd been dreading this moment, but I thought I was ready. I wasn't. When we entered, they were already there. My mother, Clarice, and Michael, all seated on the same side, all dressed in muted grays and blues, like they'd coordinated for a family portrait without me. Clarice was scrolling through her phone, legs crossed like she was waiting for brunch, not court. My mother leaned toward Michael, whispering something close to his ear. He gave a tight nod without looking up. I didn't sit. Not yet. I needed a second. The air in the room wasn't just tense, it was strategic. Every movement felt deliberate, every silence sharp. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a message. You're on your own now. I sat down slowly, and my father took the seat beside me. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. Just having him there made the chair feel less like a cliff's edge. And then my mind did what it always did when things got too heavy. It drifted. It took me back to a night I hadn't thought about in years. New Year's Eve, maybe 5 years after Michael and I got married. There had been a family party. Clarice was hosting. Lights strung across the backyard, the smell of grilled chicken and cheap champagne. I remember picking out a dress that afternoon, one Michael had complimented before, pale green with a soft neckline. But around 6 p.m., he came into the bedroom. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked, leaning in the doorway. I was curling my hair. "I'm fine," I said. "You looked tense all day. You know how crowds get to you?" He walked in, picked up the dress, held it between 2 fingers like it was fragile. "It's okay to take care of yourself. Stay in. Rest." It sounded so kind, so caring, so considerate. When I hesitated, he added, "I already told them you weren't feeling up to it. Said you needed some quiet." I blinked. "You told them I wasn't coming?" He smiled. "I knew you'd appreciate the out." That night, I sat on the couch alone while he celebrated with my family. He texted me pictures. My mother replied to his post with, "Good man taking care of our girl." Back then, I believed it. Now, I know better. He wasn't protecting me. He was planting a story, one where I was too fragile, too unreliable, too emotional to show up. A story he could use later. And he did. Later, he would talk to my mother behind my back, tell her he was worried about my mental health, that I was erratic, overwhelmed. They'd nod together over coffee, pretending concern while laying a foundation of doubt under everything I did. My father never knew. He wasn't part of those conversations. He worked long hours, traveled often. He was the kind of man who believed adults should handle their own problems until you gave him a reason not to. I never gave him one. Until now. A sharp voice brought me back. The bailiff was calling names. The judge had entered. I stood quickly, legs stiff. My father rose beside me. Michael didn't look at me. Clarice smirked. My mother? She leaned just close enough to whisper, not to me, but to no one in particular, loud enough for the room to catch it. "Let's hope she doesn't have another emotional episode today." A few heads turned. I felt heat rise in my face. A flush I hated, not from shame, from fury. Clarice smiled without showing teeth. I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the table. My father's hand found mine, solid, steady, no words. And then another memory crept in, uninvited. 2 years ago, late spring. Michael had come home late from a quick errand. I remember hugging him at the door, catching a scent, something sweet, expensive, vanilla and bergamot, Clarice's perfume. I said nothing. Later that week, during dinner, she said with a laugh, "Michael understands how families should work, unlike some people." He chuckled. "She's the only one who gets the balance, you know?" Again, I said nothing. It was easier not to see, to believe in coincidence, to protect the version of reality that hurt less. But now I couldn't unsee it. The perfume, the inside jokes, the way she always found reasons to defend him when I voiced concerns. The way my mother suddenly started praising Michael for keeping the family together. They'd been writing the same story behind my back. And I'd been the last to read it. The judge settled in. Papers shuffled. "Which party will present their opening statement first?" he asked. Michael's lawyer stood, adjusting his tie like he was hosting a meeting, not preparing an ambush. He opened a thick folder and spread it across the table in front of him. Then he pulled out a stack of photos I'd never seen in my life, and held the first one up. The moment that first photo came up, I felt my breath catch. I didn't look away, but something inside me tightened as if bracing for impact. It wasn't fear of what the image showed. It was fear of what they wanted it to mean. The lawyer held the picture between two fingers. I recognized the parking lot immediately. It was outside my therapist's office. I remembered that day. I'd sat in my car for 10 minutes before going in, head down, trying to gather myself after a long week. But now, under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom, the photo looked like something else entirely. Something manufactured, something weaponized. He placed it on the table and lifted another. This one was at a grocery store, me standing near a shelf, hand pressed lightly to my forehead. I looked tired. That was it. Just tired. But he angled the image like it was evidence of something unthinkable. Michael leaned toward the microphone and said, "She has episodes, emotional ones. She shuts down. It happens often." My mother nodded so quickly it looked rehearsed. My sister added under her breath, "We're trying to help you." Help. That was the word they always used right before taking something from me. I could feel my heart tapping against my ribs. The lawyer lined up more photos, me at a gas station talking quietly to myself, me at a pharmacy counter checking the label on a bottle, me sitting alone at a park bench with my head down. Moments of exhaustion turned into accusations. The courtroom grew still. People glanced at me the way strangers do when they hear sirens and can't decide whether to move closer or look away. For a second, the noise in my mind got so loud it swallowed everything. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was the sting of knowing someone followed me during the moments I thought I was invisible. Someone captured me in slivers of vulnerability and saved them. Not out of concern, out of strategy. My hands began to tremble. My father leaned toward me, voice low enough only I could hear. "Look at me," he said. "You survived worse than this." I swallowed hard. Something in me steadied, not fully, not yet, but enough to lift my chin. As the murmur of the courtroom faded into a blur, another memory surfaced. The night everything about the inheritance truly began slipping out of my grasp. It was 3 years ago, late fall. The house felt colder than usual, even with the heater running. I'd gone into the office to look over some year-end paperwork and noticed an account listed on my banking dashboard that I didn't recognize. A joint investment fund, both our names on it. Except I had never agreed to it. I walked into the living room with the printout in my hand. Michael was watching TV, feet propped up on the ottoman like it was any other night. "What is this?" I asked. He barely glanced at the paper. "It's an investment account." "Why is my inheritance in it?" My voice was calm, but every word felt like pushing through thick sand. "Your mother said you'd be okay with it," he replied, eyes still on the screen. "She told me you weren't great with money and that I should help manage it." It was the ease in his tone that stunned me, the confidence, like the decision had been his to make all along. When I confronted my mother afterward, she sighed and said, "You're overreacting. He's trying to create stability. You should be grateful someone is looking after the bigger picture." Grateful. That was the night something in me went quiet. A kind of surrender I didn't notice then, but looking back, it was the first thread in the unraveling. Back in the courtroom, the judge narrowed her eyes at the photos. "These images show fatigue," she said, "not instability." Michael's lawyer stepped forward. "Your Honor, there's more. These are just the beginning." I gripped the edge of the table. My father shifted beside me, quiet but alert. And then another memory hit, sharper this time. Last summer, a warm, sticky evening. I'd gone out to the backyard looking for my watering can. What I found instead was Michael and Clarice on the back porch. She was crying, shoulders shaking in a way I'd rarely seen. He stood close, maybe too close, holding her hand in both of his. "I'll always keep you safe," he said softly. "You know that, right?" They both turned when they heard me. Clarice wiped her face quickly, irritation replacing tears. "You always ruin everything," she muttered. He stepped back, too fast, as if realizing how it looked. At the time, I convinced myself it wasn't what it appeared to be. That families comfort each other. That siblings-in-law could have emotional moments. That I was imagining things. Now, sitting in this courtroom, watching them sit side by side, their stories aligned, their tones identical. I wasn't imagining anything. They had been aligned long before I ever noticed. The judge tapped her pen. Michael's lawyer motioned toward the gallery. "Her family can verify everything," he said. "They've witnessed her instability for years." My mother straightened her posture. Clarice crossed her legs and sat up, almost eagerly. My father, on the other hand, lowered his head, jaw tightening, as if bracing for a blow he already saw coming. It hit me then. He didn't just show up to support me. He showed up because he knew what they were capable of. Maybe he hadn't known every detail, but he'd sensed the tide turning long before I did. The judge looked toward my mother. "Ma'am, please step forward to give your statement." My pulse thudded in my ears. My mother rose slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse, lifting her chin with the kind of confidence only someone who believes they're untouchable can manage. And right then, before she even opened her mouth, I knew she wasn't here to defend me. She wasn't here to tell the truth at all. She walked up to the stand like she was stepping into a church pulpit, composed, chin slightly raised, her cardigan folded neatly over one arm like it was part of a sermon. My mother had always known how to play to a room. Today was no different. Except now, she was playing against me. The judge asked her to state her relationship to the parties involved. "I'm her mother," she said, gesturing toward me like I was some stranger at the edge of her life. She adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat gently, the kind of practiced pause people use before delivering something carefully memorized. "My daughter," she began, "has always struggled emotionally. It's something we, as a family, have tried to manage quietly, with compassion." I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. She didn't look at me. There were signs as far back as her teen years, periods of withdrawal, mood swings, times she wouldn't speak for days. We encouraged therapy. She refused. Her husband has been the only steady presence. He's carried more than anyone realizes. No one spoke. The courtroom stayed hushed, waiting to see what came next. Meanwhile, something inside me twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. She continued without flinching, without so much as a crack in her voice. "I love my daughter, but I've also watched her unravel more than once. There were nights she'd call me sobbing, unable to explain why. Days she forgot her own child's school pickup. She's had episodes." The words settled in the air like dust. My sister, sitting behind her, nodded along, a faint crease of forced concern between her brows. I recognized that look. I'd seen her rehearse it in the mirror once before Thanksgiving dinner, right before she'd announced she was taking a leadership role in managing family funds. Each sentence out of my mother's mouth felt like a slow, deliberate shove off a cliff. And yet, she didn't shake. She didn't hesitate. That was the part I couldn't understand. This wasn't an overwhelmed mother making a mistake. This was performance. I couldn't move. My legs had gone numb under the table. I gripped the edge just to keep from sliding off my chair. My heart wasn't racing. It was retreating. It wasn't just that she lied. It was that she did it so easily, without a tremor in her voice or a glance my way. I looked over at my father. He hadn't moved, but his jaw was clenched so tightly I could see a vein pulsing just beneath his temple. His eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. The judge narrowed her gaze. "Can you give specific examples, ma'am?" My mother nodded, like she'd expected this. There was the month she didn't leave her bed, the time she yelled at her daughter in the middle of the street, screaming for no reason. There was even a time she disappeared for a full day. We thought she might have harmed herself. Turns out she just forgot to tell anyone where she was going. It was true. None of it. "That never happened," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She turned to look at me finally and replied, cool and flat, "You don't remember anything accurately. That's part of the issue." I looked around, trying to gauge how the room was absorbing this. Some faces held sympathy, others confusion. But I saw it, doubt, settling into corners, curling under chairs, nestling in whispers. Michael leaned forward and spoke as if the weight of the world sat on his shoulders. "I've begged her to get help. I've tried everything. But I'm exhausted. I just want what's best for our daughter." My mother reached over and patted his hand gently. Clarice leaned in, gave his arm a small squeeze. It was a scene, a carefully staged one. For the first time, though, it felt too perfect, too aligned, like they'd practiced it, rehearsed their cues. The judge blinked slowly, pen resting in her hand. She didn't say anything. Then came the gavel knock. "We'll take a 15-minute recess." The air in the courtroom broke like a cracked windshield. Pressure suddenly gone, but the damage still visible. I stood quickly, needing air more than I needed dignity. I didn't wait for anyone. I moved through the hallway, eyes on the door that led to the restrooms, anything to get away from all of them. I pushed open the door, stepped to the sink, and stared into the mirror. I didn't even hear her come in. "I always knew this day would come." Clarice's voice floated up behind me. I turned slowly. She was leaning against the tiled wall, arms folded, eyes gleaming like she'd finally gotten a taste of something she'd craved for years. "You think you're the victim," she said, "but you've had everything handed to you since we were kids. The money, the attention when it mattered. You never earned it." I said nothing. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. She stepped closer. "He chose me. Not because I seduced him, because I'm stronger, because I don't fall apart when things get hard." And there it was. No more guessing, no more subtext. "I never told him to leave you," she added, smiling faintly. "He figured that out on his own." I felt heat rise in my chest, not from hurt, from clarity. She turned to leave, but the door opened again before she could reach it. Dad stepped in. He looked at her, looked at me, said nothing. Clarice froze, her smile faltering for just a second. He didn't speak to her, just stepped beside me, his presence enough to make her step back. "You don't have to answer her," he said, voice low and firm. "She's already shown who she is." I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just nodded. That one sentence was all I needed to stay upright. When we returned to the courtroom, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't a full reckoning, not yet, but I saw things clearer than I had before. They want to break me, I thought. So I won't fight. But I wasn't broken yet. The judge tapped her papers, looked up. For the next portion, we will review the video evidence submitted last week. Video? My pulse skipped. I hadn't submitted anything. I turned to Michael, and that's when I saw it. That smile. Controlled. Precise. Cold. Whatever came next, it was meant to destroy me. The moment the lights dimmed in the courtroom, something inside me clenched. It wasn't just nerves. It was the unmistakable feeling that I was being led somewhere I hadn't agreed to go. A flat screen rolled up from a cabinet against the wall. My husband's lawyer adjusted the remote in his hand. Without a word, the screen flickered to life. It was my kitchen. The angle was high, almost from the ceiling. My breath caught before I could stop it. That view, above the cabinets, I never knew there was anything there. Then I saw myself. I was standing at the sink, hair in a messy bun, my arms submerged in soap suds. Tears streamed silently down my face as I scrubbed a plate like it had done something to deserve punishment. The image switched. Now I was pacing the hallway, phone in hand, my words inaudible, but my face contorted with distress. I remembered that day. I had just hung up on my mother after she told me, "Maybe if you weren't so sensitive, people wouldn't pull away." Next scene, me sitting on the living room floor, back against the couch, hugging my knees. Then, me in the hallway snapping, "Just leave me alone," toward an unseen figure off camera. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't violent, I was exhausted. But strung together like this, the clips painted a different picture, one carefully curated, one meant to frighten. Gasps whispered across the room like wind under a door. I didn't look around. I couldn't. I felt like I was shrinking in place. My mother leaned over to the woman next to her and muttered, "We've tried for years to help her." My sister, ever the actress, pulled her hand over her mouth like she was trying to hide her pity. I sat there frozen, trying to steady my breath. I didn't feel ashamed of the moments. I felt violated. That was my home. That was supposed to be the one place where my private grief wasn't a performance. And now it was the feature presentation in a courtroom filled with strangers. My stomach churned. My husband stood up, smoothing the front of his blazer like he was adjusting for a TED Talk. "I want to be clear," he began in a soft, calm voice. "I never wanted it to come to this. But I installed the cameras out of concern, for her safety, for our daughter's safety." He turned slightly toward me, then back to the judge. "She has episodes she doesn't remember. These videos were the only way I could show the truth. She's refused help for years, therapy, medication, everything." He let out a carefully timed sigh. "I didn't want to shame her. I wanted to protect her." My mother dabbed under her eyes with a tissue I'd swear was dry. My sister patted his arm like she was proud of a teammate scoring the winning point. It was a perfect little theater troupe, but I couldn't speak. My throat had tightened too much. Then, something else played. A clip of me again, this time sitting at the dining room table, phone pressed to my ear. I was crying, wiping my face with the sleeve of my sweatshirt. On the audio, my mother's voice came through the speaker. "You need to calm down," she said sweetly. "I'm worried about you." That's not what she'd said. I remembered that moment like a scar. What she'd really said was, "No wonder he's exhausted. Who could live with you?" And suddenly, something else hit me. Something I hadn't thought about in months. We were at her house, months before this all began unraveling. She'd pulled me aside after dinner, a glass of wine in her hand, voice lowered like she was offering sage advice. "If he's dealing with things, maybe he should start documenting them," she said, "just in case things ever get complicated." At the time, I brushed it off. A mother worried for her son-in-law, but now I saw it for what it was. She wasn't worried. She was laying the foundation for this day. All of it had been planned, crafted, rehearsed. I sat there, hands trembling under the table. Not because I was broken, because I finally saw the trap. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd been preparing for my downfall like it was a strategy. I stared at the screen, my own image flickering back at me, tired, drained, small. And yet, the room stayed silent. Until one voice broke through, my father. He stood slowly, steady and deliberate. The judge looked over. "Sir?" He cleared his throat, then spoke. "What I see," he said, voice low but firm, "is a woman trying to keep herself together. A woman being filmed without her knowledge in her own home. That's what should concern this courtroom." His words cut through the room like a sharp wind. No theatrics, no rehearsed emotion, just truth. People shifted. The judge tilted her head slightly, brow tightening. My husband didn't respond. He only leaned toward his lawyer. "Show the next part," he said, just loud enough to carry. I swallowed hard, because if the first video was meant to weaken me, the next one was meant to destroy me completely. The screen lit up again before I had a chance to recover from the first blow. The courtroom dimmed for the second time, but this time the silence felt heavier, expectant, like we all knew something worse was coming. A new video began to play. This time the angle was lower, eye level, not from a fixed position, but handheld, shaky. It felt invasive from the first frame. In the footage, I was in our kitchen, shouting at my husband. My face was red, my hands animated. I appeared to throw a glass on the floor where it shattered loudly. But something was wrong. The audio was warped. The pacing of my movement was too quick, unnatural. The clip had been tampered with. Even the lighting looked off. It wasn't surveillance. It was staged. "This isn't real," I said, standing halfway up before the bailiff gestured for me to stay seated. "That's edited." My husband's attorney didn't flinch. And there it is, denial, right on cue. I turned toward the judge. "That didn't happen. That is not what it looks like." The room was silent again, except for a few murmurs. "She looks out of control. That's terrifying." Every whisper sliced through me like a dull blade. My mother placed a hand over her chest, eyes wide like she was seeing something for the first time. "She scared all of us," she said, loud enough for the bench to hear. "I truly feared for our family." It was rehearsed, delivered with perfect pause and trembling tone, like a well-practiced actor mid-monologue. The screen went black and the lights came up slowly, but everything still felt dim to me. My breath wouldn't deepen, my fingers were numb. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat there and let the numbness wash over me. It wasn't the video that broke me. It was the realization that they were willing to go this far, to erase everything about who I actually was and replace it with a caricature, a version of me that served their story. I felt like I was watching myself vanish, frame by frame. I couldn't even find the strength to be angry. My sister was next to speak. She walked up to the stand like she was going to deliver a eulogy, her eyes already brimming with fake tears. She didn't look at me right away. When she did, it was with a look of forced sorrow, as if I were the one who had died and she was the one left grieving. "I love my sister," she began, voice soft, "but I can't lie for her anymore." "Lie for me? She's been unstable for years. We've all tried to protect her, but the truth is, she nodded toward my husband, was the only one who didn't walk away. I clenched the edge of the table until my knuckles burned. "I begged her to get help," she continued, "and the worst part, she once told me she didn't want to be a mother anymore. I was terrified for her daughter." Gasps echoed like cannon fire across the room. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Not because I didn't have the words, but because no one would believe them anymore. That moment had never happened. None of it had. But the performance was flawless. She stepped down slowly as though she'd just done something noble. I couldn't feel my hands, couldn't steady my breathing. The judge looked at me, not with judgment, but with concern. Still, concern wasn't belief. My mother nodded solemnly. My husband stared at the floor like the weight of loving me had taken everything from him. I realized then that no matter what I said, no matter how loud I screamed the truth, it wouldn't matter. The narrative was set, and I was losing. Until my father stood, not abruptly, not with the fire I expected, but with purpose. He walked past our row and stood, his hands steady at his sides. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but thunderous. The entire courtroom turned. "I've sat here all morning listening to lies," he said. "Fabricated stories meant to tear down my daughter, and I won't sit quiet anymore." He turned toward my sister. "You're not here to tell the truth," he said, pointing. "You're here to protect the man you've been sneaking around with." Gasps erupted like a wave hitting concrete. My sister's face drained of color. Her mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order in the court!" Chaos bubbled around me, but I sat still, staring at my father like he had just pulled me from deep water. My sister stumbled backward. My husband grabbed his attorney's sleeve, whispering quickly. My mother clutched her pearls like they could somehow save her reputation. "Sit down," the judge said again, her voice slicing through the noise. The room quieted, but the damage had already been done. The balance had shifted, even if just slightly. Moments later, the judge sighed and looked down at her notes. "This session is adjourned. We'll resume tomorrow morning at 9. The crowd dispersed slowly. My mother walked past without a word, her eyes cold. My husband didn't look at me. My sister trailed behind them, her movement stiff. My father placed his hand on my back gently. His touch wasn't showy, just steady. "You're not done," he whispered. "Not yet." For the first time that day, something in me stirred. As I gathered my things, I felt his breath near my ear. "We need to talk tonight," he said, low. "There's something you should see." I turned toward him. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. And that's when I realized he'd been keeping a secret of his own, one that could change everything. We drove in silence for most of the ride. My father didn't push conversation. I didn't offer any. The emotional weight of the courtroom still clung to my skin like humidity after a thunderstorm. My hands were folded in my lap, but they wouldn't stop shaking. When we pulled into his driveway, the sky had already deepened into that soft blue that only shows up in early evening, right before the streetlights flicker on. His home sat quietly behind a low fence, modest and unassuming, like it had nothing left to prove. I hadn't been here in years. It looked exactly the same. Clean porch, wooden rocking chair, a faded wind chime that swayed without sound. "Come inside," he said softly. "You're safe here." And I believed him. The contrast hit me almost immediately. His house, while simple, felt warm, peaceful. There were no sharp corners here, no frozen glances or footsteps that grew louder when things went wrong. The air smelled like cedar and coffee, and there was something grounding about the familiarity of it all. He gestured for me to sit at the dining table, a round one with a slight wobble. I remembered breakfast here once when I was 12. We'd eaten pancakes, and he'd let me put too much syrup on mine. My mother had said it was irresponsible. He said it was Saturday. "I'll be right back," he told me and disappeared into his study. I watched the light from the hallway shift across the floor. I don't know how long he was gone, 5 minutes maybe, but when he returned, he carried a small stack of items in his arms. He set them on the table gently. A metal drawer key, a stack of printed emails, a few folded letters, a small velvet box, and a USB drive. "I haven't opened that drawer in years," he said, sitting across from me. "But I knew one day you'd need the truth. I just prayed it wouldn't come to this." I looked at the items and felt a familiar tightness crawl into my throat. He handed me the printed emails first. They were between my husband and my sister. Subject lines like, "When she finds out," and "Be ready tonight." The content read like a script. Details about meetups in hotels, Venmo transactions for things labeled pet sitter, and travel reimbursement. I felt my stomach turn when I read a line from my sister. She doesn't deserve any of this. You and I built this together. And then another from my husband. Once the money transfers, we're done pretending. I placed the papers down like they were made of fire. I don't understand, I whispered. You weren't supposed to, my father said. They counted on you not seeing it, on trusting the wrong people. I stared at the USB. My fingertips hovered over it, but he didn't hand it to me yet. Instead, he pulled out a folded page from one of the letters. Your mother knew, he added. She didn't just turn a blind eye, she encouraged it. I felt the betrayal crack open, a part of me I didn't even know was still holding out hope. He sighed, leaned back in his chair. I tried to tell you in my own ways, over the years. But every time I got close, your mother would cut contact, start a fight, turn you against me. I thought you just didn't try hard enough, I admitted, ashamed. You weren't blind, he said. You were outnumbered. That line landed like a stone in my chest. Then he handed me the velvet box. It was small. I opened it slowly, almost afraid of what I'd find. Inside was a light blue ribbon. Faded, slightly wrinkled, but still tied in the same little loop I remembered. I held it between my fingers like it might disappear. I kept it, he said, voice quiet now. She threw away your drawings one day, just tossed them in a garbage bag and told me they were childish nonsense. But I saw that ribbon tucked in the corner of the pile. I took it. I couldn't let everything go. A memory surfaced, me drawing at the kitchen table, blue ribbon in my hair, showing her my crayon version of a family photo. She told me to clean up, said I was making a mess. I thought I'd imagined how cold she'd been that day. But I hadn't. I wanted you to know someone cared, he said. Even back then. I closed the box slowly. Something inside me shifted. I wasn't unloved. I was misled. He finally pushed the USB toward me. Then he opened his laptop and inserted it. This, he said, is how we get our footing back. What followed wasn't just video footage. It was the full, unedited camera archives. Moments from the same days they'd shown in court. Only this time without the cuts, without the distortion. There I was crying, yes, but with my daughter's backpack still slung over my shoulder. There I was snapping, leave me alone, but only after my husband had mocked me under his breath for 10 straight minutes. He clicked on an audio log, a conversation between my husband and sister, talking about which clips they could edit to appear erratic. There was even a deleted text thread recovered from backup where my sister sent a message that read, "Get her rattled. The more emotional she is in court, the better it works." I covered my mouth. He clicked pause. I got this from a friend in tech, my father said. I didn't want to accuse them until I was sure. I've been gathering it for a while. Why didn't you show me earlier? I asked. Because you weren't ready, he said gently. And because I wasn't sure what they'd do if they knew I had it. I sat back in my chair, my pulse racing. But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't out of fear. It was something else, resolve. I felt something settle inside me, I told him. Not rage, not revenge, just clarity. He smiled, just slightly. I'm going back tomorrow, I said. Good, he replied. But not as the woman they think I am? He nodded. Exactly. He closed the laptop. Tomorrow, he said, they won't see you coming. And for the first time in months, I felt the ground under my feet. Steady, solid, mine. I didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up afraid. When morning came, I moved with a kind of stillness inside me, like someone who'd finally stopped running from a storm and turned to face it. The courthouse steps felt different beneath my feet. Not softer, just mine. I wasn't trembling anymore, not because they couldn't hurt me, but because they no longer controlled the narrative. They didn't own my voice. They never did. I just hadn't known how to use it. Inside the courtroom, I noticed the shift right away. My husband looked at me a little too long, his smile stretched too tight. My sister scanned the room like she couldn't find her footing. My mother gave me that same stiff-lipped stare she'd perfected over the years, disapproval masked as concern. My father sat quietly in the row behind me, his expression unreadable but steady. That steadiness, his silent presence, had become my anchor. We didn't wait long before my husband's lawyer stood abruptly. His voice had a rehearsed urgency to it. "Your Honor, we have recently discovered additional materials relevant to this case." He handed a manila folder to the court clerk. "In this folder," he continued, "you'll find a financial record indicating concealed account activity, as well as a written statement from family members expressing serious concern regarding the petitioner's mental stability. We're requesting immediate temporary control over all marital assets, pending further review." My breath caught, but I kept my hands still in my lap. My sister rose to her feet, her tone dripping with concern. "I love my sister," she began, the same way someone might start an obituary. "But I can't stay silent anymore. She's been unstable for years. We've all covered for her, but enough is enough. She gestured to my husband with wide eyes, "has done everything he can to protect her." My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her sleeve. I looked at the judge. She didn't react. Not yet. But I saw her brows tighten. They were throwing everything they had left. I stood before the judge could ask. "I have a response," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "And I'd like to begin with the truth." Silence fell over the room. I reached into my bag and pulled out the USB drive. "This," I said, "contains unedited footage from our home security system. It also contains technical metadata confirming which videos were altered, slowed down, or cut." I handed it to the court officer, who walked it to the clerk. "I also have proof of deleted conversations, audio recordings, and messages between the people accusing me today." The judge nodded, then gestured toward the screen. The footage began, and the room shifted. There I was. Yes, emotional, but not out of control, just exhausted. Worn, provoked. Each clip played in full. No edits, no cuts. One clip showed my husband following me around the kitchen, needling me with passive jabs about my parenting. Another showed my sister standing just off camera, feeding him lines while he recorded me. Then the audio started, a recorded phone call. My sister's voice. "Once we edit it right, the court won't question it." His response. "She'll look like a lunatic." Gasps rippled through the room. And then, like gasoline on an open flame, came laughter. Their laughter. I heard my own breath in the courtroom. Shallow, controlled. My husband stood abruptly. "This is nonsense. This is—" The judge raised her hand. My sister muttered, "She wasn't supposed to have that." And that was the crack. My father stood up slowly behind me and addressed the judge with a clear, calm voice. "I'm the one who recovered that footage," he said. "With the help of a certified cybersecurity expert, I started to notice changes in how my daughter was being portrayed. I knew something was wrong." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just stood there, the only adult in a room of children playing games they thought they'd never lose. I turned back to the table and reached into my purse again. This time, I pulled out the ribbon. I placed it gently on the table, beside the courtroom microphone. "I used to believe I didn't matter to my own family," I said softly. But that was a lie I needed to believe in order to keep playing the role they gave me. No one spoke. I thought I was broken, hard to love, overdramatic. But I see now, those were their words, not mine. That was never my reflection. That was the cage they built for me. The judge looked at me, then back to the screen. The video had stopped playing. The evidence was enough. My husband stepped forward, voice rising, face red. "This is ridiculous. She's twisting everything." My sister snapped. "She wasn't supposed to have that footage." My mother stood now, completely unraveling. "Why is everyone believing her? She's always been dramatic. She lies to get attention." The judge slammed her gavel. "Enough," she said. "This courtroom will maintain order." And just like that, their alliance cracked wide open. You could see it, the blame shifting, the panic setting in. They weren't a team anymore. They were three people clawing to escape the fire they started. The judge cleared her throat and leaned forward. "We will recess briefly while this evidence is reviewed by an independent analyst. Officers, please escort the parties back to their seats." As people moved around, my father leaned forward, resting a hand lightly on my shoulder. "They know," he whispered. "It's over." I nodded, not in celebration, but in quiet recognition. I wasn't afraid of their noise anymore. As I gathered my things to step into the hallway, a uniformed officer approached my husband. "Sir," he said calmly, "I need you to come with me." And in that moment, the power they stole from me began returning one piece at a time. The moment the officer touched his shoulder, something inside me exhaled, not in relief, but in recognition. This was justice unfolding, finally. My husband looked at the officer, startled, then at me. "This is a mistake," he said quickly, trying to sound reasonable. "She's framing me. This isn't what it looks like." But it was. Everyone could see it now. My sister reached out and grabbed his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear, but the officer gently pulled them apart. Her face twisted, not in fear, but disbelief, like the story she'd been living in had suddenly collapsed. And maybe it had, but I wasn't the one who broke it. I stood there, watching as they disappeared down the hallway. The same hallway I used to walk through with lowered eyes, apologizing for things I didn't do. Now the hallway watched me. I could feel the shift in the room. People who once looked at me like I was unstable now saw something else. Clarity, truth, strength. We returned to the courtroom. The tension had drained from my limbs. What remained was something more solid, resolve. The judge entered, adjusted her glasses, and spoke with deliberate calm. "After thorough review of the submitted materials," she began, "the court finds the footage to be authentic and unaltered. There is compelling evidence of manipulation, coordinated coercion, and attempted fraud." She paused. "As such, Mr. Callahan may be subject to further criminal investigation. Ms. Rivers, having knowingly participated in these acts, is also subject to civil scrutiny." My sister's shoulders caved in, her expression blank. The judge continued, "Mrs. Callahan's assets, including her personal and inherited accounts, shall remain under her sole protection. Mr. Callahan forfeits any claim to shared property on grounds of demonstrated breach of good faith." My mother whispered harshly beside my sister, "This can't be happening." But it was. It was happening right there under the lights they used to shine on me, hoping I'd stay small. The judge's gaze finally landed on me. "I commend you," she said plainly, "for maintaining composure in the face of significant emotional adversity. You have shown maturity, restraint, and dignity. You are now free to rebuild without the burdens these individuals imposed on you." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about release. Outside the courthouse, the air felt clearer, the sun warm against my skin. I hadn't noticed how long I'd been cold until that moment. My father joined me on the steps, holding something small in his hand. He opened his palm to reveal the ribbon, cleaned, untangled, whole. "You kept it," I said quietly. He smiled gently. You kept going when no one protected you. It deserves to stay with you now. I held it like something sacred. That small strip of fabric had once meant so little to everyone else, and so much to me. It wasn't about needing their approval anymore. It was about remembering I survived without it. We walked together to his car without much talking. That silence between us wasn't heavy. It was whole. Back inside, as we sat at his kitchen table, he poured us both coffee and asked, "So what now?" I looked out the window at the quiet trees lining his backyard. "I'm not rebuilding the old version of my life," I said slowly. "That version was never mine to begin with." He nodded like he'd known the answer before he asked. "I think I'll take some time off," I continued. "Maybe head down to the coast or find a cabin somewhere. Just space, something quiet, something mine." He didn't argue. He didn't offer advice. Just reached across the table and covered my hand with his. That evening, as the sun dipped lower behind the trees, my phone rang. A detective's voice came through the line. "Mrs. Callahan, we've officially opened an inquiry regarding evidence tampering and potential witness coercion. I may need a full statement from you." I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said. "I'll tell you everything. I'm ready." When the call ended, I stepped out onto the porch and sank into the wooden swing. The sky was streaked with orange and soft violet. The world didn't feel loud anymore. I opened my palm. The blue ribbon lay across it, no longer knotted or frayed. I tied it gently around my wrist, not as a reminder of pain, but as a quiet testament. Once, I held on by a thread. Now I held on to myself. The porch creaked as I leaned back. A few stars blinked into the evening sky. The hush of the moment wrapped around me like a soft quilt. And then the thought came, not with drama, but with certainty. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who hurt you the most. But sometimes one person standing beside you is enough to save your life. And sometimes that person can finally be you. And for the first time in years, I was no longer shaking. I was finally steady.